We're back! It's so good to be with you, my holy sisters and brothers. It was way too long to be away. Thank God we're back. And the Daf Yomi, the daily class, is up and running again. We took the hiatus, for anyone who didn't know, to make this movie, Man in the Long Black Coat. We had pre-production in the fall, production in November and December. Now we're in the post-production stage of the movie. We're actually doing some of the editing right here in my office. And this is Peter, who is editing the movie. So it's even happening as we speak. You just heard during the 2-minute warning bird sounds. And you might recall that my mom died in September, so I'm in the year of Avelus, the year of saying Kaddish for one's parent when you lose a parent. And so, you don't turn on a radio to listen to music. You don't go to live music events, and that's why we're using kind of nature sounds, jungle sounds during that warm-up rather than the Jewish music that we would normally be hearing during that 2-minute countdown till class begins. Who's in the house? Let's see. Lucy in Minnesota, Yehudit in Florence, South Carolina. So nice to see you again, and Mazel Tov on the movie. Thank you so much, Yehudit. And Tom says welcome back. And Paul in the Great Northwest, Leona in Illinois, Melissa in Great Neck, Shandora in the Bronx, Franco from Trieste, Italy. Welcome, Franco. Stephen in New Hampshire, Sarah in LA, Bella in Florida, Luis, which is Karen in Northern California, Paula in Chicago. Paula says Mazel Tov. Bill in Mid-Missouri, Spencer, Behatzlacha, wishing us success from Hartford, Connecticut. John in Maine, Rebecca in LA, Patrice is in Utah, Sharon in New Jersey, Sammy saying welcome back, Jonathan from Thousand Oaks, PK from Colorado, Renee in Indiana, Joe from the Inland Empire. Christo's over here on the YouTube side. Last November, I went to the Kotel, right, to the Western Wall in Jerusalem, and left a note to the Eternal One mentioning you and Nina. That's so sweet, Christo. Thank you so much, and may God bless you in all your ways. Aoife is here saying so happy to see you again. And Nancy, nothing on Facebook. No, it's on Facebook. It is on Facebook on the Accidental Talmudist page on Facebook. Also, Michelle says welcome back, and Susan in Missouri. Welcome, everybody. It's so great to be here. Let's light up the darkness. Oh, let's light up the darkness. Okay, so when we left off, when we had to just stop, I think it was in October, right? Maybe September, but we left off in Tractate Kesubos, right? Which is the law of the ketubah, of marriage contracts. And then while we were apart, the cycle continued through Tractate Nedarim. That's the laws of vows. And now, just last week, we made the siyum on Nedarim, and now we're in Tractate Nazir. So Nazir is the laws of the Nazirite vow, right? One who takes a vow, it's spelled out in the Torah, that he's going to hold himself or herself to a higher level of sanctity, in which you cannot not only no wine, but no product of the grape, right? No grape vinegar, wine vinegar, no table grapes, nothing from the grapevine. Don't cut your hair, and don't allow yourself to come into contact with impurity of a corpse, right? So you don't touch a dead person. If you are a Nazir, right? And so the famous Nazir is Samson, right? The story of Samson and Delilah, Samson in the Bible, who was dedicated as a lifelong Nazir, even by his mom. He never had a choice in the matter because an angel told her to do that, and he ended up becoming a hero, or a rescuer of Israel during a time of its wars with the Philistines. And so he's a very famous Nazir. So we're going to get to Tractate Nazir momentarily, but since we missed this whole tractate together, Nedarim, I thought I would share some highlights. Just quickly, just a few highlights from Tractate Nedarim. So Nedarim, a neder is a vow, and no one's forcing you to take a vow, but if you take that vow, then you have to fulfill your vow, right? It then becomes a legal obligation to fulfill your vow. There's many, many laws, many technical laws. If you've taken a vow, a married woman who takes a vow, her husband can nullify the vow for her. That's actually not a sexist thing. That's a privilege that women have that men don't have. A daughter can have her vow nullified by her father. And it's a good thing because sometimes we take a vow when we're not thinking straight in a fit of emotion, and we'd really rather not fulfill that vow. But if a man takes a vow, the only way that he can get that vow nullified is to go to a sage or a group of sages and have the vow nullified for him. There's a lot of ins and outs and technicalities of that. But we're not going to do that whole tractate. So I just wanted to do some highlights, and the highlights that I've selected from Tractate Nedarim, it's not so much technical laws of vows, of Nedarim, right? Vows. A neder is a vow, Nedarim is plural, vows. But I picked some passages that are just really colorful and interesting, and we wouldn't have wanted to go through or go past a Tractate Nedarim without hearing some of these passages. So very quickly, on Daf Chaf, right, on page 20, Amud Beis, the B side of page 20 in Tractate Nedarim, it is taught near the bottom, on the A side, at the bottom of the A side of page 20, it is taught in a Baraisa, quote, that his fear may be upon your faces. That's a verse from Exodus 20:17. And now, his fear upon your face, this is referring to the attribute of shame, which causes one to blush, right? So when Exodus 20:17 says that you not sin, right? That his fear may be upon your faces, that you not sin. And what is this referring to? This teaches that shame leads to fear of sin. And from here, the sages said, it is a good sign in a person that he is one who experiences shame. And others say any person who experiences shame will not quickly sin. And conversely, one who does not have the capacity to be shamefaced, it is known that his forefathers did not stand at Mount Sinai. So we have a tradition that all of the Jewish people, all of the Jewish souls that kind of ever were at Mount Sinai. There's reincarnation, and there's even that the heavenly host was present when God gave the Torah to the Jewish people at Mount Sinai. So it's not only the Jews of that generation, but sort of all Jewish souls were present at Mount Sinai when the Torah was given. And according to this teaching, one who is shameless, right, who lacks the capacity to be ashamed, there's something not Jewish about that person, right? It's Jewish, and you've heard of Jewish guilt, and this idea of shame. Now, it's not that shame is something we should wallow in. I remember very clearly Schwartzy, my good friend Rabbi Shlomo Schwartz, talking about this quality of shame. Shame is positive if you look back on something you've done and you say, what was I thinking? What was I doing? Why did I allow myself to behave that way? I know God wants more from me than that. I know God gave me the capacity not to indulge in that kind of sinful behavior, and I'm not going to do it again. And God, please help me not do it again. That's positive shame. You ask for that help, you move on. To wallow in shame, to sit in that shameful place and not know how to escape from your shame, no, that's not positive. That's not going to take you forward and allow you to make a teshuvah, to make an atonement, to improve yourself, better yourself, and do better the next time, right? So the shame will motivate that improvement, but you don't allow it to drag you down and paralyze you from moving forward with your life. Next highlights from Tractate Nedarim. We skip to page 22 at the top of the B side. Then Rabbah bar Rav Huna said, anyone who gets angry, at that moment, Even the divine presence, the Shekhinah, is not important to him. As it is stated, quote, and this is from Psalm 10, verse 4, the wicked, in the height of his anger, says, he will not require. All his thoughts are, there is no God. In other words, before we're talking about the attribute of shame, now we're talking about the attribute of anger. If we give in to our anger, of course we're all going to become angry from time to time. But this is something that can help us escape that angry place, that when we give ourselves over to anger, it's as if we're saying there is no God. What's the connection? When you're so angry, you've completely lost sight of the idea that God runs the world. God is good. God has a plan for everything and everybody. And so the thing that's triggering my anger, it might be better for me to say, man, this hurts. This upsets me. I really can't stand it. But maybe God has a reason for sending this challenge my way. And as soon as you have that thought, it actually will calm you down and allow you to have a little bit of objectivity in the moment and say, what's going on here? What's really going on? It's very difficult to do. This is the kind of discipline that, as you get older and grow in wisdom, you'll have a chance at getting to that place. It's difficult in the midst of our anger to say, whoa. God has a reason for this event that's happening right now. Let me check my anger for a moment and see if I can see another side of this situation. But you can look to this place, page 22b, Nedarim, for this wonderful reason to escape anger, which is to say that if you give in to anger, it's like you're saying there is no God, the world is random, terrible things are happening to me, and I'm just going to vent in rage and fury, right? Rabbi Yirmiyahu Difti said, anyone who gets angry forgets his learning and increases foolishness. As it is stated, for anger rests in the bosom of fools, Ecclesiastes 7:9. And it is written, but a fool unfolds folly, Proverbs 13:16. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, with regard to one who gets angry, it is acknowledged that his sins are more numerous than his merits. As it is stated, and a wrathful man abounds in transgression. And it makes sense. I mean, we're in the height of our fury. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to, stray into sin, as it were, much easier than when, we can calmly analyze what's going on around us. And so avoid making big decisions in the heat of anger. It's kind of obvious advice, but that's a good reminder. We skip forward. This is page 32a, Tractate Nedarim. Now they're talking about the mitzvah, the commandment of circumcision, right? So I was actually just at a bris this morning when a Jewish boy is born. 8 days later, he is completed, as it were, through the circumcision. And the mitzvah of circumcision is equal, according to this teaching, to all the mitzvahs of the Torah, all of the commandments of the Torah. How can we say that? As it is stated at the giving of Torah at Mount Sinai, for according to these words, I have made a covenant with you and with Israel, Exodus 34:27. And the word covenant refers to circumcision. Alternatively, so great is the mitzvah, the commandment of circumcision, that if not for circumcision, heaven and earth would not have been established. Why could we say that? As it is stated, Jeremiah 33:25, if my covenant be not with day and night, I would not have appointed the ordinances of heaven and earth. And the covenant that exists day and night, the continuous covenant for all time, is the covenant of circumcision. Why? Because it is always found on a person's body. So the Gemara comments, and this statement disagrees with the words of Rabbi Eliezer. For Rabbi Eliezer said, great is the Torah. For if not for the Torah, heaven and earth would not have been established. As it is stated, if my covenant be not with day and night, I would not have appointed the ordinances of heaven and earth. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, the covenant that exists day and night is the Torah. As it says, you should contemplate it day and night. So Rav Yehuda said that Rav said, at the time that the Holy One, blessed be he, said to Abraham, our patriarch, walk before me, and you should be wholehearted. Wholehearted. right? So Abraham was the father of really monotheism in the world, right? The first Jew, but also the father of the Abrahamic tradition. So, all the monotheistic religions stem from the moment when Abraham realized and gave himself into this relationship with God, right? So God said to Abraham, walk before me and you should be wholehearted. And at that moment, a sensation of trembling seized Abraham, and he said, perhaps there is something disgraceful about me due to a transgression that I committed, and therefore I cannot be called complete. And when God said to him, and I will make my covenant between me and you, his mind was set at ease, since he understood that the removal of the foreskin that he was now commanded to do was the reason that he had not yet achieved completion. So the Gemara expounds the verse, and he brought him outside, Genesis 15:5. Abraham said before God, master of the universe, I looked at my constellation, my mazel. Right, so when you say mazel tov to someone, today we were at a bris, a celebration, we say mazel tov to all the fellow guests and of course to the parents of the baby, you say mazel tov, right? Which we normally translate as congratulations. But what mazel tov actually means is a good constellation, right? A good arrangement of the stars overhead. That's what it means. Why are we talking about that? So Abraham said to God, master of the universe, I looked at my constellation, in other words, my horoscope, and according to it, I will have only one son, and a son has already been born to me, right? Ishmael was born to Abraham not through Sarah, his wife, but through Sarah's handmaid, Hagar. And so Abraham said to God, God said to Abraham, leave your astrology behind, right? Emerge from your astrology is how it's written here. Emerge from your astrology. Why? Because there is no mazel for the Jewish people. There is no constellation for the Jewish people. What does this mean? There is no fated outcome, right? Like we talk about the stars as our fate, right? That you're born under a lucky star, under an unlucky star. This idea that you can look into the stars in ancient times, right? There were diviners and astrologers who would tell you what your future is going to be. God says to Abraham, there is no mazel for the Jewish people. In other words, the Jewish people keep up their end of the covenant, keep up their performance of the commandments and walk before God in a holy manner, try to imitate the ways of God by being kind, right? By being holy, by being learned. If we behave properly as Jews, then, there's no limitation on what we can achieve in this world. And that's what it means, no mazel for the Jewish people, no mazal for the Jewish people. So Rabbi Yitzhak said, anyone who conducts himself with wholeheartedness, the Holy One, blessed be He, treats him with wholeheartedness. As it is stated, with the devout you act devoutly, and with the one who is strong in his wholeheartedness, you act wholeheartedly. I would say that the best way to be wholehearted with God is to observe the commandment, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, right? So just as you've heard me say many times, if I love my wife, Nina, and I love her so much, would I just feel that love inside and never tell her that I love her? I wouldn't be a very good husband if I was like that. You got to tell your wife you love her. You got to tell your husband that you love him. You want to tell your children that you love them. You want to tell your siblings that you love them. Someone you love, you want them to know that you love them. So if you're commanded to love God, tell God you love him. Say it out loud with your mouth. And that is a wonderful way to, get more wholehearted with God as you start to not just think in an abstract way about loving God, but by saying it to God and being in a relationship with God, you start to feel and experience that love. And Rabbi Hoshaya said, anyone who acts wholeheartedly, time will stand for him, i.e. he will be successful. As it is stated, walk before me and you shall be wholehearted. And it is written, and you shall be the father of a multitude of nations. Being wholehearted with God, you will feel good for sure. Things will go well in your life, kind of like as a secondary attribute of being wholehearted with God. You'll have more success in all your affairs. Page 38a. Rabbi Yochanan said, the Holy One, blessed be He, rests His divine presence only upon one who is mighty and wealthy and wise and humble. I'm not going to read this whole passage, but this is basically the idea of resting the Shekhinah on a person means making them a prophet, right? And so what we're learning here is that all of the prophets had these qualities, that they were mighty, physically strong, they were wealthy, they were prosperous, they weren't worried about money, of course they were wise, and they were humble. So we may not rise to the level of prophets, but it is good, to have a livelihood and to pursue a livelihood. You don't have to be a billionaire or a millionaire. You don't want to be worried about money all the time. You want to have your financial affairs in order. Obviously, you want to grow in wisdom. You want to be studying and learning. You want to be physically fit. And if you're all these things, you could easily become arrogant. Don't. Stay humble, like our teacher Moses. Here we go. Page 39b. Rav Acha Bar Hanina said, anyone who visits an ill person takes from him 1/60th of his suffering. We encountered this idea in the first tractate of the Talmud Brachas. We encounter it again. It's always worth repeating. I actually did this mitzvah yesterday. I have a friend who was ill. I went to his house and sat with him. And when you go and visit the sick, you take away 1/60th of their suffering. So shouldn't we just send 60 visitors to any sick person and they'll be healed? That's what this Gemara now talks about. And of course, no, that's not proper math. If you come, you take away 1/60th, and then the next visitor takes away 1/60th of what's left. So you'll never get to zero, but it is certainly worthwhile to the person being visited to lose 1/60th of their suffering. Let's skip forward a little bit. Okay, it is taught in a baraisa, right? So a baraisa is like a Mishna, but not quite as authoritative, but still one of the cornerstones of the oral tradition, the oral law. It is taught in a baraisa that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, if youths, right, if young people would say to you, build, and the elders would say to you, demolish, who should you listen to? Listen to the elders and do not heed the young people, as the construction of young people is demolition, and the demolition of elders is construction, is building. And the mnemonic device for this matter is Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, right? The son of Solomon, who became king after Solomon, was a disaster, such a bad king that's when Israel split into Israel and Judea, and eventually the kingdom of Israel was destroyed and only Judea remained, right? So this idea, because he was dumb, right? He listened to his young advisors. Solomon had been the greatest king the world had ever seen. How could his son be such a disaster? Well, one thing that Solomon did is he taxed the people very heavily in order to build the temple, right? David sort of picked the spot, got everything together, but Solomon built the first temple. That's why we call it Solomon's temple. And there was a price to pay. So when Rehoboam, his son, became king, Solomon's advisors, the older advisors, said to Rehoboam, you're a new king. You're not Solomon. The people have been taxed heavily, but the temple has been built. Ease up on the taxes. Let them fall in love with you, that you become king and you ease up on the taxation. And then you'll establish your throne in a smart way as a young man. And his young friend said, what are you talking about? Your father taxed them like this. You tax them like that. You teach them that you're a powerful king and you've got things to build too. It didn't go well for Rehoboam. All right, so when you're seeking advice, put a premium on advice from your elders. And if your elders say it is a time to demolish, do it, because, before you can build anything, often you have to demolish what was there before, right? So sometimes the demolition of the elders is actually construction. We skip forward to page 50b, and this is a famous story that the daughter of the Roman emperor said to Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananiah, you are the epitome of magnificent Torah. but it is stored in an ugly vessel. Can you imagine? This woman, she's such a spoiled princess. She says to one of the sages of Israel, one of the greatest sages of Israel, wow, you're so wise, but I don't understand how so much wisdom resides in such an ugly man. Right? What did he say to her? He said, well, you may learn the answer to your question, how could so much wisdom reside in such an ugly vessel, like this. You may learn the answer from your father's house. Tell me, in your father's house, in what container do you place wine? And she says, well, we keep our wine in earthenware vessels. And he said to her, is it conceivable? Excuse me. Is it conceivable that everyone in the empire, the Roman Empire, stores their wine in earthenware vessels? The poorest schnook who has wine in his house keeps it in a clay vessel. And you're the princess, and your father, the emperor, you also keep your wine in earthenware vessels? You should store your wine in silver and gold vessels. You're the emperor and the emperor's daughter. So what did she do? She went and placed the wine in vessels of silver and gold. What happened to the wine? It spoiled. And Rabbi Yehoshua said to her, the same is also true of the Torah. It spoils if it is contained in a handsome person, right? Obviously, silver and gold is not the right material for storing wine. You put it where it's appropriate. So she asked him, but are there not people who are both good-looking and learned in Torah? And he said to her, if they were ugly, they would be even more learned. I'll let you make of that story what you will. And by the way, Nina's in the other room collecting questions and comments. She'll pass them to me at the end of class. If you've got questions or comments, put them in the comments. Excuse me. Okay. What are we doing on time? We're going to get to the daf, today's page, Nazir 8, but it's a relatively short daf, so we can have, we're okay doing a few more of these highlights from Tractate Nedarim. So apropos a story of Rabbi Tarfon's regret for gaining personal benefit from his status as a Torah scholar. So Rabbi Tarfon was a great sage, incredibly learned, a great and gifted teacher, also a very wealthy man, and very humble man. And so at one time, there's a story, where he interacted with some people, and they didn't realize that they were dealing with a sage. And then he identified himself as a sage, and then they treated him very differently. And then he regretted that he had allowed them to know that he was a sage, because you don't make use of the crown of Torah for personal benefit, right? They treated him differently in some financial matter once they realized he was a sage, and he regretted that he had allowed them to learn that because he didn't want to make any inappropriate use of his status as a Torah scholar. So apropos that story, it is taught in a Baraisa that the verse states, to love the Lord your God, to listen to his voice, and to cleave to him. This verse indicates that a person should not say, I will read the written Torah so that they will call me a sage, or I will read Mishna so that they will call me rabbi. I will review my studies so that I will be an elder and will sit in the academy. Rather, you should learn from Scripture, you should learn from the Bible, you should learn from the Talmud. For what motivation? Love. You should learn because these teachings come from God. Ultimately, they come from God. Everything from the Torah is from God. And you should learn out of your love of the Lord. As the verse states, to love the Lord your God. And if you do that, then honor will eventually come of its own accord. As it is stated, bind them upon your fingers, write them on the tablet of your heart. Proverbs 7:3. And it states, its ways are ways of pleasantness, and all its paths are peace. And it states, it is a tree of life to those who hold fast to it. Happy is everyone who holds it fast. And consequently, one who studies in order to master Torah for its own sake, as reflected in the verse, bind them upon your fingers, will eventually merit pleasantness, peace, and happiness. It'll be a side effect of growing in wisdom, growing in your learning, that you will become a wiser, more dignified, kinder, happier, more charming person, right? One who immerses themselves in Torah continuously, it starts to show. it starts to show on you. You become a more kind, patient, easygoing, attractive person. That's not the reason to do it. You do it in order to come closer to God and because you love God. But that will be a kind of side effect of that process. I must say, I wasn't learning as much as I wanted to be learning during those heavy months of like the late pre-production and production. We were making a movie with a holy subject, in the sense we have a rabbi detective who conducts himself in an upright manner, even though he's surrounded by gunslinging criminals and he has to defend himself in his community. It's an action thriller. But he's very much a Chabad rabbi who conducts himself that way. So we feel like in making this movie, we're making a Kiddush Hashem, right? We're sort of sanctifying God's name in the world. But nevertheless, when it was so heavy, I couldn't learn as much as I'm accustomed to learning. And I found myself being a little bit more tense and stressed out at times. It's a perishable attribute, as it were. You have to always be growing in wisdom. You can't just study for a long time and then you grew in wisdom and then you stop, because you'll backslide. Right? You'll backslide. Okay. And then finally, I'm going to skip that story. So those were the highlights that I wanted to share from Tractate Nedarim. And now, let's go into Tractate Nazir. That's the tractate we're in now. Today's daf, right? Today's page in the Daf Yomi schedule in the calendar, the 7.5-year cycle, is page 8. And we're going to get into that in 1 second. These are the laws of the Nazir, right? So one who takes the vow, a very specific vow mentioned in the Torah, that he will become a Nazir, or she can become a Nazir. And when you become a Nazir, so you can't have anything from the grapevine, not the vine itself, not the grapes to eat, not wine, not grape juice, not grape vinegar, nothing like that. And you don't make yourself impure for the dead. You don't cut your hair, and then when the term of Nazirus ends, then you have to bring certain offerings if the temple is standing. And with the temple not standing, no one takes the vow of a Nazir in the present time, because you can't come out of it, since you can't bring those offerings that can only be brought when the temple is standing. The Gemara starts by mentioning, okay, well, when you take on the vow of Nazirus, what is the formula that you say? Like one could say, I would say bli neder, meaning I'm not taking this kind of vow. I'm not meaning to become a Nazir. But you would say words like, okay, I hereby pledge to be a Nazir. And then you would say for how long. If you don't specify how long, it's going to be 30 days. If you do specify a term longer than that, then it's going to be that you have to be a Nazir for the amount of time that you pledged to be a Nazir. And then you can be ambiguous. You didn't really say I pledge to be a Nazir, but I say I'm going to be like him. But there's a Nazir in front of you. All right, so then you said enough that you now are obligated to be a Nazir. Maybe you want to get out of your vow. You're going to go to a sage or a beis din, right, a rabbinic court, and tell them that you made a mistake when you uttered that vow, and see if they can nullify it for you. But you're going to be obligated in such a vow. So there's lots of different formulations of what words come out of your mouth that obligate you to be a Nazir. And that's the subject of the first few pages of our tractate. I just want to read one little passage, kind of famous, from page 4b, before we get to page 8. So with regard to a Nazir, isn't it written in the Torah, Numbers 6:2, that he shall clearly utter a vow, the vow of a Nazir, to consecrate himself to the Lord? And if you do, what kind of a Nazir did you become? Is it for a limited term, or did you become a Nazir like Shimshon, right, like Samson in the Bible, in the book of Judges, right, the famous Samson who was a Nazir all his life? Or do you become a Nazir not like Samson, but a different kind of permanent Nazir? And the difference between a kind of lifetime Nazir and a permanent Nazir, one of them can cut his hair from time to time, either once a month or once a year, and the other one can never cut his hair. Apropos this discussion, it was taught in a Baraisa that Shimon HaTzadik said, right? So Shimon HaTzadik was a high priest serving in the temple, and he was also the last. There was the judges and the prophets, and then the men of the great assembly. And then after the men of the great assembly, you get the pairs of sages that lead to the sages of the Mishna, right? Like Hillel. Oh my God. Hillel. Why is this happening to my brain right now? Hillel and Shammai were one pair of sages. But the first of the pairs that's mentioned is Shimon HaTzadik, right? The last of the men of the great assembly. So about this Shimon HaTzadik, who's a very righteous, holy, beautiful person, he said, in all my days as a priest, right? And he ended up being the Kohen Gadol. I never ate the guilt offering of a ritually impure Nazir, right? So a Nazir who, he says he can't become impure by touching a dead body. He can't help bury a body. Although he must help bury like the unattended corpse, right? So even one who may not become impure must help bury the unattended corpse if no one else can bury it. But if other people can bury it, then he shouldn't. Now, if he does touch a corpse, then he has to interrupt his term of Nazirus, bring certain offerings, bird offerings, and then start again, right? And so some of these offerings that are brought, some of it is the guilt offering or the sin offering. Part of that is eaten by a priest. So Shimon HaTzadik said he never wanted to have anything to do with the offerings of Nazirites, right? Of people who are Nazirs. And he said, in all my days as a priest, I never ate the guilt offering of a ritually impure Nazir, apart from the offering of one man who came to me from the south, and he had beautiful eyes and a fine face, and his hair was arranged in curls. And I said to him, my son, what did you see that led you to become a Nazir, which would force you to destroy this beautiful hair? As a Nazir must cut off all his hair at the conclusion of his term of Nazirus. And the boy said to me, well, I was a shepherd for my father in my town, and I went to draw water from the spring. And I looked into the water at my reflection. And my evil inclination quickly rose against me and sought to drive me from the world. Meaning, he looked at himself and said, wow, I'm really handsome. I mean, I could get anybody I want, to marry or to fool around with. Right away, when he saw how good looking he was, he started having all kinds of sinful thoughts. And so I said to my evil inclination, empty one, for what reason are you proud in a world that is not yours, as your end is to be maggots and worms when you die? I swear by the temple service that I will become a Nazir and shave you, right? He's looking at his own reflection. I will shave you for the sake of heaven. So Shimon HaTzadik relates, when I heard this response, I arose and kissed him on his head and said to him, may there be more Nazirs like you in Israel whose intentions are noble and who would not regret their vow of Nazirus even if they became impure. With regard to you, the verse states, when either a man or woman shall clearly utter a vow, the vow of a Nazir, to consecrate himself to the Lord. And the verse speaks of a vow that is not undertaken out of anger or spite, but purely for the sake of God. And the phrase to the Lord in this context means for the sake of heaven. It cannot be used to teach that if one declares his intention to become a Nazir like Samson, that his statement constitutes a Nazirite vow. They're having a different discussion over there. But the point is that in that story, he's making this very clear distinction. Why are you becoming a Nazir? Why are you seeking to deprive yourself of something that is permitted, right? It's permitted to drink wine. In fact, we're commanded, right, to make kiddush on wine. Now, you can make kiddush without wine, but it's part of the celebration of life. You shouldn't overindulge, obviously. But, we bring in Shabbat by making a kiddush over wine. Why would you give that up? It's considered wrong to take vows and wrong to become a Nazir. Who are you to elevate yourself in a, extra manner of holiness that is unnecessary? That's what Shimon HaTzadik is saying. It's not good to become a Nazir. If you make yourself a Nazir, okay, then you have to fulfill the vow that you made, but it is preferable not to. Except in this one case where the guy really had a holy intention that was reasonable and that made sense, that if he didn't become a Nazir, he might slip into folly and sin for other reasons. Okay, Let's go to today's page, 8a at the top. And we actually begin Mishnah number 9 here in chapter 1 of Tractate Nazir. If one says, I'm hereby Nazir like the hair of my head, or like the dust of the earth, or like the sand of the sea. Why would you say that, right? You have to define the term, how long you're going to be a Nazir. The rules of being a Nazir are the same for everybody. Except that you can choose how long you intend to serve as a Nazir. So if you speak a phrase like, I'm going to be a Nazir like the hair of my head, what does that mean? Well, you have, many, many thousands of hairs on your head. So is he saying that I'm going to be a Nazir for as many days or as many months or as many years as there are hairs on my head? If one says like that, then he is a Nazir forever. He has accepted a separate term of Nazirus for every hair or particle of dust or sand, which in practice means that he will be a Nazir forever. And he shaves his hair once every 30 days. Because you didn't say, what the argument is going to be here is, if you say I'm going to be a Nazir like the hairs on my head, are you saying I will be a Nazir for as many days as there are hairs on my head, and you could count that? Or is he saying I will be the standard term of being a Nazir is 30 days, so I will serve as many 30-day terms as there are hairs on my head? And then if you are serving 30-day terms, they go one after another, but at the end of each 30 days, you could cut your hair. You don't have to grow your hair forever. Whereas if you say I'm going to be a Nazir for 10,000 days or 1 million days, then it's all one term, and that's why you could never cut your hair at all. So Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says this Nazir does not shave his hair once every 30 days, as he has accepted upon himself one long term of Nazirus, lasting for as many days as there are hairs or particles of dust or hand. And who is the Nazir who does shave his hair once every 30 days? It's one who says, it is hereby incumbent upon me to observe Naziriteships, right? Naziruses, plural terms of Nazirus, like the hair of my head, or like the dust of the earth, or like the sand of the sea. Since he used the plural term Naziruses, right? The plural Nazir plural, then that person, right? Naziros, right? So that person, that person has multiple terms. So because he used the plural term for terms of Nazirus, that's a person who can shave every 30 days, according to Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. If one says, I'm hereby a Nazir in accordance with the capacity of the house or the capacity of the basket, so one checks with him what he had in mind. If he said, my intention was to take a vow of Nazirus for one long term of Nazirus, so he is a Nazir, only 30 days, in accordance with the ruling of the Mishna, that the words long or short are of no account when used in taking a vow of Nazirus. But if he said, I took a vow of Nazirus without specification, so it is assumed that he meant to accept upon himself terms of Nazirus corresponding to the number of items that fit into the basket, and the smallest items normally placed in the baskets are used for this evaluation. Consequently, one views the basket as though it were full of mustard seeds, which are very small, and this guy, now it becomes a Nazir for life. If one says, I'm hereby Nazir from here until such and such a place, one estimates how many days it takes to walk from here until such and such a place. And if it is less than 30 days, he is a Nazir for 30 days, since this is the minimum term of Nazirus. And if not, i.e. if he takes more than 30 days to walk that distance, then he is a Nazir in accordance with the number of days it takes to walk to that place. If one says, I'm hereby Nazir in accordance with the number of days in a solar year, he counts 365 consecutive terms of Nazirus. He'll be a Nazir for the rest of his life in accordance, right? 365 months of Nazirus, right? In accordance with the number of days of a solar year. So Rabbi Yehuda said there was an incident where someone took this vow and observed 365 consecutive terms of Nazirus. And once he had completed all these terms of Nazirus, he died. I mean, it's not necessarily for the rest of your life, but if you're thinking 365 months, right? That's a lot, right? 36 months is 3 years. So now we're talking like 30 years. So the Gemara says, And once he completed all these terms of Nazirus, he died. So maybe he was like an old man, and because he took this vow, it actually kept him alive, that he was completing all those terms. And then when he finally completed them, then he expired. Okay, that was the Mishnah. Here's the Gemara. The Mishnah taught that if one said, I am hereby Nazir in accordance with the capacity of the basket, and he did not specifically intend to accept one term of Nazirus, one views the basket as though it were full of... Just get me stand here. As though it were full of cucumbers, right? Much better if you're talking about, I'm a Nazir according to the capacity of this basket. Well, maybe 4 cucumbers fit in the basket, or hundreds of mustard seeds. Why not say, I meant cucumbers. I meant as many cucumbers as will fit in that basket. That's how many terms of Nazirus I intend to take on. So why not cucumbers? And the basket would consequently hold fewer of them, and there would be a remedy for him. He would be able to complete his terms of Nazirus and resume life as a non-Nazir. Well, in response to this question, Chizkiah said, this issue is taught as a dispute between the Tanaim, the rabbis of the Mishnah. And the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, who said that a person places himself in a state where the resulting uncertainty is more stringent than if there were certainty. Right? So what we're saying here is no one's telling you to become a Nazir. Right? You can only become a Nazir when the temple is standing. You shouldn't do it. If you do it, you decide to do it, okay, be careful. Make sure you have a good reason for doing it, and then clearly define what you're doing. You could just say, Bli Neder, I am hereby a Nazir. Okay, so that if you specified no time, okay, then that just means 30 days. Doable. Right? But if you now, because you're angry or being silly or drunk when you do this, or emotional, and you add the wrong words to your vow, right, then your vow takes on a meaning and an obligation that you may not have intended, but which you will be held to. And if you speak ambiguously, but in a manner that could be interpreted, that will have a stringent and difficult outcome for you, well, that's going to be the outcome, because in matters of holiness, we tend to be stringent in cases of uncertainty. At least for Torah laws, right? For rabbinic laws, in matters of uncertainty, we're lenient. But when we're looking at Torah laws, and the vow of Nazirus is a Torah law, right, a written Torah law, then we have to be stringent. And it is taught in a Baraisa with regard to one who says, I am hereby a Nazir on the condition that this pile of grain will be found to contain at least 100 kor. That's a large amount. And he went to measure the pile, and he found that it was stolen, or the pile was lost, making it impossible to determine whether it contained 100 kor or not. So Rabbi Shimon permits him to drink wine or cut his hair, as he holds that in a case of uncertain Nazirus, like whether he became a Nazir or not, one is required to act stringently. Similarly, Rabbi Shimon prohibits him to drink wine or cut his hair, makes him a Nazir, because he holds that in a case of when it's uncertain whether you became a Nazir or not, we're required to act stringently. Similarly, in the case of the Mishnah, since it is not known whether one intended to accept Nazirus according to the number of mustard seeds in the basket or according to the number of cucumbers in there, he must act stringently. But Rabbi Yehuda permits this person to drink wine or cut his hair, as he holds that in a case where it is uncertain whether you became a Nazir or not, one is permitted to act leniently, and the Nazirus does not take effect since the pile might have contained less than 100 kor. And Rabbi Yochanan said, you can even say that the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, because the cases in the Mishnah and in the Baraisa are not comparable. There, in the case discussed in the Baraisa, he does not necessarily even enter the state of Nazirus, as it is unclear whether the pile contained as much grain as he spoke about, and you don't know because he might not have contained that much, and then the pile was stolen, so there's no way to know. So since he tied his vow of whether he becomes a Nazir or not to the amount of grain in a pile, and then the pile disappeared, well, there might not have been enough there to obligate him to become a Nazir in the first place, and now there's no way to know. So why should we act stringently in this case? He might never have been forced to become a Nazir according to the terms of his vow. Where am I? Even even enter. Consequently, he retains, since there was no reason to know for certain that he was ever obligated to enter a state of Nazirus, so he retains his previous status and he is not considered a Nazir. And conversely, in the case discussed here in the Mishnah, he certainly enters a state of Nazirus since he undoubtedly vowed to be a Nazir for some period of time. Consequently, how is it possible to remove the state of Nazirus from him when it is uncertain when his terms end? Therefore, even Rabbi Yehuda would agree that he remains a Nazir indefinitely, right? So they're separating the question of how long did I say I'm going to remain a Nazir from I'm not sure if I ever became a Nazir in the first place. And the Gemara asks, why is it not possible to remove from him the status of Nazirus? Let us view the basket as though it were full of cucumbers or gourds, as he has accepted at least as many terms of Nazirus as the number of cucumbers or gourds that would fit in that basket. And in this way, there will be a remedy for him. He can, serve his terms of Nazirus and then go back to regular life. Whereas if we say that we're going to define the amount that fits into this basket that he, maybe in a fit of emotion or anger, said, well, I'll be a Nazir like the contents of that basket, and there wasn't specified what the contents were, why should we hold him to saying that it's going to be filled with mustard seeds, which would make him a Nazir for the rest of his life? Why not give him the remedy? And the Gemara asks, so it entered our minds to say that it is distinct terms of Nazirus that he accepted upon himself. And so once he has completed the minimal number of terms of Nazirus, he should no longer be considered a Nazir unless it can be determined that he accepted more than this number of terms of Nazirus. Now we're in 8b. And the Gemara answers, this is not possible, as Rabbi Yehuda holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, as we learned in the Mishnah, with regard to one who vows, I am hereby a Nazir like the hair of my head. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says this Nazir does not shave his hair once every 30 days because he accepted one long term, as many days as there are hairs on my head, not as many terms of Nazirus as there are hairs on my head. And who is the Nazir? And who is the Nazir who has accepted distinct terms of Nazirus, and therefore he does shave his hair once every 30 days? This is one who says, it is incumbent upon me to observe terms of Nazirus like the hair of my head. He defined it as plural terms, sections, right? Periods of Nazirus, that's plural, not just days of my one term. And one who says it is incumbent upon me to observe terms of Nazirus like the hair of my head, or like the dust of the earth, or like the sand of the sea. Since Rabbi Yehuda agrees with Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, he holds that one who uses a formulation similar to that used in the first case in the Mishnah and says, I'm hereby Nazir according to the capacity of the basket, has accepted one long term of Nazirus. I'm actually going to skip. Usually I try to do the whole page, but since tonight we did highlights of a whole tractate that we missed, I want to leave a little bit of time for questions. So I'm just going to skip to the last passage of our page at the end of 9b, and it also happens to be the last passage of chapter 1 of Tractate Nazir. So we're finishing chapter 1, and with God's help tomorrow, we'll open chapter 2. So the Gemara cites a baraisa dealing with these same expressions. So let me go back a second. The sages taught in a baraisa, if one said, I am hereby a Nazir. So the sage Sumachos says, if he then added the word hen, which means one in Greek, he has accepted one term of Nazirus. If he said digon, which means two sides in Hebraicized Greek, he must observe two terms of Nazirus. In other words, you would think he would just say, I am a Nazir for this many days, or I am a Nazir for this many terms, right? Or I am just a Nazir, and then it's assumed that it's 30 days. So if he's speaking in a foolish, weird way, and he says, I am a Nazir 1, or I am a Nazir 2. So they're saying, well, you shouldn't have said that. You did say that. So what did you obligate yourself to do? To be a Nazir for 1 term, or 2 terms, or 3 terms, where each term is 30 days. So if he said, I am hereby a Nazir trigon, which means triangle in Hebraicized Greek, then he has accepted 3 terms. If he said tetragon, then he has accepted 4 terms. And if he said puntagon, he has accepted 5 terms of Nazirus. And the Gemara cites another baraisa dealing with these same expressions. Total digression, but on the same idea of something that has 2, 3, 4, or 5 elements. The sages taught that a round house, a two-sided house, a triangle-shaped house, and a pentagon-shaped house cannot become impure with tzara'as of a house, right? We've said that tzara'as is that skin condition, but there's also tzara'as of a building, right? The Torah says that a house can become contaminated. It's not mold. It's, when we're living at a higher spiritual level, then houses could become, imbued with tzara'as, and then you have to bring a priest to examine it, and you might have to condemn the house and have it destroyed. But when the Torah speaks of a house, it's speaking of a four-sided structure. And that's the lesson that's being taught here. If the house is some kind of like weird oval or triangle shaped or five-sided, then it's not a house subject to the definition of tzara'as, right? So this is a leniency in case you find these stains appearing on your walls, you won't have to tear down the house. Additionally, in the verse above, it states, when referring to a wall, a plural term, walls, and behold, if the plague be in the walls of the house, and these plural terms are unnecessary, it is therefore understood that there are four walls mentioned here in order to indicate that a house can become impure through tzara'as of the house. It has to have four walls. And that concludes chapter 1. Okay, let's go to some questions or comments to round out the hour. Here on our return on January 31st. PK, Sal, you are so funny and very smart. It is a pleasure to learn from you. You are so sweet, PK. Thank you. I appreciate having you in the class. Joseph, when one takes a vow in the name of something, like the temple or the Torah, is this discouraged like taking Nedarim are generally discouraged? Yes, right? It is generally discouraged to take vows, period. Right? So Nazirus, you can't do that anymore because at the end of Nazirus you have to bring offerings, and you can't bring the offerings when the temple is not standing. But a vow, you can make a vow, and that's why, for example, we say, I'm going to give a gift, to the synagogue, right? Like you're making a pledge. Right? So you might say, well, I'll give and say a certain number, and you say bli neder, that it is not a neder, it is not a vow. You are intending to give and to fulfill your pledge, but just in case something comes out and makes it impossible for you to fulfill the pledge, you don't want to become a sinner who didn't fulfill his vow. Now, you don't need in making a vow to say, I swear, and I'm just talking and teaching here, by heaven or by God or by the Torah. You don't need to use a formula like that in order to become obligated in a vow. It's kind of like an emotional thing that you want to strengthen the vow by invoking. Like you're really showing that you're cognizant that in making this vow, you're doing something that under the law of the Torah, and as witnessed by God in heaven, you now become obligated, and if you don't fulfill your vow, you've sinned. So that's what you're really doing when you invoke those words, but it's not necessary, and it's preferable not to invoke those words, and it's preferable not to make vows. Maybe just, give the charity. Don't make a vow that you're going to give it. Tom, if you take a vow when drunk, are you held to it? That's a complicated question. I think basically, yeah, you are. So really try to avoid that. And if you always make vows when you're drunk, don't get drunk. You could, go to the Beis Din, you could go to the rabbinic court and say, I was completely out of it. I had no idea what I was saying. It was not me speaking. It was the wine talking. But this is definitely improper, inappropriate behavior. And beyond that, I'm not a rabbi. I'm not sure about the technicalities of that law. So definitely avoid making vows, especially when intoxicated. Joseph, I would guess if someone is getting so drunk that they are taking Nazirus, it's probably a good idea anyway. Right. So that could happen, right? Somebody who's realizing that being, on drinking wine a lot is making them do inappropriate things in their life. That might lead to them taking the vow of Nazirus when the temple is standing, but they shouldn't do it while they're drunk. That is a person who might be have a good reason, a valid, appropriate reason for becoming a Nazir, but he should still, consult with his rabbi before doing it. Tom, friends don't let friends swear a vow of Nazirus while they're drunk. And finally, Bill. Question that I've been mulling since we moved to our current daf. Suppose there was a Nazir who took his vows in the twilight of the days of the temple, and he went on a long journey during his equally long Nazirus. Let's say for argument's sake, he took a term of 10 years. So he returns home to find in his absence that the Romans have burnt Jerusalem and destroyed the temple. Can he be released from his vow? What a great question. What a great question. It's kind of one-off situation, right? Since the second temple was destroyed, permanently only once. One thing he could do is maybe go to the Beis Din and basically they would quiz him and he would say, had I known that it was possible that the temple could be destroyed and that I would never be able to emerge from Nazirus, I would never have vowed to become a Nazir. And under those conditions, perhaps they could nullify his vow for him. I could see that happening, but I'm not sure. Okay, my friends, that's what I have for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. And we'll just get right into the next daf, Nazir, page 9.